Thank you for joining us for today's presentation by Professor Ana Rodríguez, who will speak to us today on Wise and Valiant, Spanish Women Writers and Their Legacy. I'm Janet Linus, ICFRC board member and host for today's program. As always, we thank our members, supporters, and interns for making these forums possible. I also want to acknowledge our organizational sponsors, the University of Iowa's international programs, the University of Iowa's Honors Program, the University of Iowa Public Policy Center, and the Stanley U of I Foundation Support Organization for their financial support. I also thank City Channel 4 and the U of I Digital Libraries for helping us continue to make our programs available to our online audiences. We would also like to mention our gratitude to the Iowa Arts Council for their financial support through the Iowa Arts and Cultural Recovery Program. As we get started, I would like to just cover some basic Zoom etiquette, as though we haven't been doing this now for well over a year, but just to remind you, please take a look at where your mute buttons are and your unmute buttons. And I would ask that you mute and turn off your video for the presentation today. Once we get to the question and answer period, I would ask that you turn on your video, but still remain muted. We will do questions through the chat feature. I ask though that you mute so that we do not interrupt the speaker while she is speaking. We will start the question and answer period at about approximately 12:45 and have about 15 minutes of question and answers. So with those instructions in mind, I would like to say it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Ana Rodríguez-Rodríguez. Ana M. Rodríguez-Rodríguez is an associate professor specializing in early modern Spanish literature. She has published many articles on a variety of topics such as Christian-Muslim relations in the Mediterranean, women's writing, and the Asian Spanish Empire. In 2013, she published a book exploring Spanish captivity writings during the 16th and 17th centuries. And she is currently writing a monograph about the Philippines during Spanish colonial rule of the archipelago. Rodríguez-Rodríguez completed a Ph.D. on Spanish literature at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2007, and a second Ph.D. in Philology at the Universidad Complutense de Madrid in Spain in 2021. I apologize, I practiced saying that correctly, and I apologize, but the person who helped me told me it is a very prestigious university and was quite impressed, so I will note that. In 2015, she received the Huit Faculty Award for her teaching and research. And in 2020, she also received the International Engagement Teaching Award, awarded by International Programs and the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at the University of Iowa. Professor Ana Rodríguez will present and discuss the exhibition she recently curated in Spain, staged by the Cervantes Institute and Spain's National Library, and which also has an online version, where Spain's female writers' lives are celebrated and their works displayed. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ana Rodríguez-Rodríguez. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that kind introduction. So, well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to share this exhibition that happened last year in Spain. It was first an face-to-face exhibition. Then COVID hit. This exhibition was open in March. So COVID hit right after we had the opening. So we developed an online version that is still around, and that has been actually the Smithsonian picked our exhibition as one of the top 10 world exhibitions, online world exhibitions from 2020. So it was silver lining. It was actually silver lining that we had to actually develop this online exhibition so it wouldn't die. But then things got better in Spain over the summer. With COVID. So we had a reopening of the face-to-face exhibition in June, and was open up until the end of September. So the 3 months that it was supposed to happen from the get-go. So it was, again, silver lining. There isn't anything good about COVID, of course, but it gave us the opportunity to develop the online version that is now available on the internet for everybody who wants to check it. And that gave us the visibility, and the University of Iowa also the visibility that for the Smithsonian to pick this exhibition as one of the top 10 from last year. So I would love to take you to the exhibition. I would like to take you in person to Madrid and, and give you a tour. But since I cannot do that, when I was thinking about what to talk to you about, I decided I would like to give you like a small tour through the exhibition, telling you about the context, about the rationale behind the exhibition itself, and some of the writers and some of the works that are featured, because I thought that, you know, maybe that would open your interest to maybe go to the online version or, you know, or learn more about these wonderful, wonderful writers. These are writers who wrote during the golden age of Spanish literature and culture, which is between the 16th, 17th centuries, starting a little bit in the 15th, but mainly 16th and 17th centuries. And everybody knows, for example, from this time period of Spanish literature, Miguel de Cervantes, right? And Don Quixote, of course. Some people know Lope de Vega, some people know, I mean, there are a myriad of wonderful writers that, that have made this time period, in particular, the golden age of Spanish literature. And the Spanish literature wouldn't have such a wonderful time until the beginning of the 20th century, when people like Lorca and also in art, not only literature, Dalí, people like that, that I'm sure you know, that's called the silver age, of Spanish literature and culture. We're now at the golden age, but what happens? We all know a lot of these writers, but all of them were male writers. And when I went to school in Spain, I went to school all of my life in Spain. I graduated from college in Spain before I came to the States. Nobody taught me anything about one single woman, except for Santa Teresa, Saint Teresa. Except for her, nobody taught me anything about women writers in this time period. So you may think they didn't write. Well, they did, they did. But different circumstances made these women silent. They were silenced for a long time. And that's why this exhibition made sense. Let's celebrate these women. And in many cases, it's not going to be only a celebration. It's going to be, you know, for many people, seeing their names for the first time and realizing that there is a lot of interesting work produced by women in this time period, in the golden age of Spanish literature. So that's the rationale behind the exhibition. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly so I can show you some images. Again, since I cannot take you to Madrid with me, at least I want to show you some images of the actual exhibition when I was there. And then as I talk about the different writers, I will have some images that hopefully will make the presentation more interesting and easier to follow. So the name of the exhibition is Wise and Valiant, women writers of the golden age of Spain, something like that, translation, quick translation. And this is a quote that comes, Wise and Valiant, comes from one of the books written by one of these women, by Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. So to me, it captured very well what I wanted to do here, show how these women had to be wise, of course, but also valiant, courageous, and break with the tradition and break with the expectations. Here is me, the day of the opening, and I'm showing you this picture because one of the important things for me was showing their names. For many people, it was the first time they knew about these names. So there are plenty of women, very important women with high quality writing that were unknown for many people. So that's one of the points, celebrating their names and getting to know them. This is the building where the exhibition took place in downtown Madrid. And there is you have the image here of the building. So if you had gone to the exhibition, you had entered this door, and then this was the outside of the building. They did a wonderful work advertising outside the building, the exhibition. So it was very exciting. It was wonderful being there for the opening. The exhibition started like this. I mean, you entered the exhibition and this is what you saw. And then there was lots of information about the context, the things I'm going to tell you about today, basically. The content, about the context, about why we were doing this. And then you were at the exhibition. And there are many different works. And let me put this here. I'm sorry, just one second. So there are a lot of different books that were featured at the exhibition, manuscripts, printed books, original documents, publications, also many of them from the 16th and 17th centuries. I thought it was very important to show the actual books, the actual manuscripts, and to see the handwriting of these women, and also the first time their books were published back in the 17th century. Anyway, so that was part of the exhibition. The other part is also visual material, posters and publications, more recent ones from the 21st century, showing the interest that these women have attracted. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, depending on the writer, that they have attracted in the contemporary world. So that is some more images of the exhibition so that you get an idea of what you would see. That, as you can see, there are some panels with a lot of information, the books, more information in this little card here. And then around the exhibition, we had texts by these women, different quotes from works they produced. So we were surrounded by their words throughout the whole exhibition. And it was very successful. Here are some of the more modern books, right? Showing how they have been published also modernly. Some of the older books, some of them had never been shown for the public until this exhibition. And then also some information about movies, about, TV shows and things that have been done more modernly with their works, about their lives, etc. So anyway, that is the little introduction I had about the exhibition, just to give you the idea of what would have been going there to Madrid. And what was the situation for women in the 16th and 17th century in Spain and in many other places, but in Spain in particular? Well, during the 16th and 17th centuries, women's lives were conditioned by strict limitations, which reduced their presence to the domestic space and limited their public lives. The Spanish manuals on female behavior of the time reflect the mentality of a hierarchical and patriarchal society where women would be limited to their role as wives, mothers, daughters, or sisters, and would not participate in any issue beyond the domestic sphere. It was considered that for young women, kindness, honesty, and tasks which would be typical of their gender would suffice. Some thinkers explicitly claim that God limited women's understanding and restricted their capacity of reasoning because good and honest women were not made for the study of science or the difficulties of business, but for simple and domestic labor. The effort to isolate and confine women was mainly, it had a very strong reason. It was mainly because the family honor, the foundation of the social organization, was based in women's sexual behavior. Therefore, women were subdued to strict vigilance, which assured the maintenance of an impeccable public reputation. The dishonor of a woman in the family would bring about the fall into disgrace of all its members, who would need to clean their honor. In many occasions, simple suspicions or defamatory lie would be enough to condemn a woman to social ostracism, a forced marriage, or death. The more confined the woman was and the more limited the appropriate activities for her gender were, the easier it was to control her movements and ensure her honor. In this context, women's intellectual education, as you can imagine, was not only a priority, but was not only not a priority, but it was actually discouraged. It was much more important to teach young girls how to sew, embroider, or cook than to read and write. Let me just check. Okay, I'm showing you some images of the time, right? With some, this is from VELAZQUEZ, for example, with some, images about what the expectations were for women, right? Okay, so. It was much more important to teach the girls how to do all these other things, sew, embroider, etc. Learning how to read would not necessarily imply also learning how to write. That's another thing you have to take into consideration. One thing was learning how to read, another thing was learning how to write, because the goal of reading for women was to facilitate access to religious writings. Prestigious authors mocked the model of the educated woman, considering it something ridiculous. In general, academic and intellectual training was inappropriate for the female gender, and the role in bringing up their children was frequently related to the widespread belief in their lower intelligence. In this context, female writing was perceived in the worst cases as a threat to the established order, and in the best cases as a minor contribution to the world of writing. Thus, writing was for many women a heroic act. By writing, women revolted against what was expected from them and automatically became suspicious and exposed to the cruel scrutiny of a cultural universe that was not ready to embrace them as members. The discrimination suffered by women in the access to writing was evident, and similarly, their works were judged in the light of critical prejudice. Despite everything, many women managed to overcome the difficulties, and they wrote. Some even succeeded in more difficult things like publishing, offering their text to the public, representing their place on the stage, and achieving the recognition of contemporary and future readers. Despite the opinion of some critics, there were a considerable number of female writers in the 16th and 17th centuries in the Hispanic world. For centuries, we have been told that there weren't women, not many women writers in this time period, and the ones that we knew were not so good. So that is completely false, in my opinion, as a literary scholar. Many of their works from all the genres have never been published or received critical attention, that is true, which has condemned them to oblivion. In order to find and study those texts, we need to remember that the majority emerged mainly in three fields. Convents, poetry contests, and the so-called popular genres, which were at the time theater and short novel. First, convents. That's a very, very important place for women writers at this time. A considerable number of the women that wrote were nuns, writing their works from convents. In fact, more than 80% of these female writers were religious who belonged to an order, although we don't know a lot about most of them. We don't know exactly who they were, sometimes even their names. In many of their texts, we find an exaggerated modesty, which truly or falsely is manifested through apologies about their style, their lack of capacity to create, or their audacity to write. When analyzing the constant declarations of humility, it becomes evident that their writing is developed under strict control that conditions their creation. However, it is precisely that censorship which triggers their wit in order to overcome those limitations. Conventual writing covers a huge variety of genres. Don't think only about religious writings. There is a lot of variety: poetry, history, biography, diaries, drama, letters, novels, and even travel books. And one example of one of these travel books is this text, which was written by two nuns, which is a chronicle of the foundation of a convent in Lima, which also includes the narration of the fascinating journey to South America, of a group of nuns who, risking their lives, venture to the unknown and experience a variety of experiences and adventures. One of the nuns passes away during the trip, a victim of breast cancer, a quite common illness in convents. This text offers one of the few reflections by a woman of that time about this illness, its treatment, and its lethal outcome. Besides, it includes descriptions of the reception in Buenos Aires, which is now Argentina, and Lima in Peru, and the parades and religious festivities in which they took place. All these accounts appear in a context which reveals the power of the church in South America as another element of colonial power and control. The female body, this is very interesting in this particular book, the female body traditionally hidden in veils and habits, especially in relation to nuns, by these same strict norms to which this text was subjected, acquires prominence in this account when the hardships of the journey uncover wounds, burns, pain, and various disorders during the trip. These narrations humanize the protagonists and discover a corporeality that is not at odds with their intense spiritual experiences. The Prado Museum holds the portrait that you're seeing now, where Diego Velázquez painted another traveler nun. There were quite a few, actually, nuns that traveled around the world. This is Sor Jerónima de la Asunción, who arrived in the Philippines in 1621 in order to found the first Franciscan convent in Manila. One of her fellow travelers, Sor Juana de Cristo, wrote the biography of the founder of Mother Jerónima. We're talking about convents, and sometimes we have a misguided idea of what a convent meant at the time. For many women, the convent, women who longed for reading, writing, creating, the convent became a paradoxically liberating space to fulfill these activities without the constrictions which married life would have imposed upon them. Some women, many women actually, found between the walls of the convent a space of creative freedom from where they took part in the Spanish cultural life of the time, something like an avant la lettre room of one's own, which would be requested by Virginia Woolf centuries later. Convents were authentic literate communities where most of the texts written by women in these 2 centuries were produced. A large number of these writings remain in the archives, unexplored and awaiting to be rescued. 2 great female writers framed the conventual writing of the 16th and 17th centuries, Santa Teresa, Saint Teresa, and Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. Santa Teresa, Teresa de Jesús, was the most remarkable female author in Spain in the 16th century. And following her example and under the influence of profane texts, nuns will gradually broaden the scope of their creations and their reception throughout both centuries, which will necessarily transform the texts themselves, as well as the social impact and the perception of the importance of female writing in those decades. In this way, following the path opened by Santa Teresa, Saint Teresa, we get to the end of the 17th century and we get to the fascinating and immeasurable figure of Sor Juana, an incomparable thinker, a brilliant author, and admirable woman. Saint Teresa, Santa Teresa, is a key figure of female religious writing in Spain. The undeniable quality of her works, characterized by a very expressive, close, and simple style, along with her personal trajectory, served as a model and inspiration for many nuns when deciding to embark in the process of writing. She became quite a controversial figure, both for her reformations in her religious order, and also for her writing, task which caused her many, many problems with the Inquisition. Her work is, along with St. John of the Cross, the best example of Spanish mystic literature. Teresa was a transgressive, brave, and determined woman, both as a reformer and as a writer. In the context of a society and institution which were conditioned by a strong patriarchal character, Teresa always defended the dignity, her dignity as a woman, her independence, and her intellectual capacity. However, her works were thoroughly censored. In 1559, when the Index of Banned Books was published, the inquisitors destroyed the small library that Teresa owned in her convent. The Inquisition ordered to confiscate her work, especially the Libro de la Vida, Book of Life. But Santa Teresa kept a copy of the manuscript, which made its publication possible after she died. In 1984, the Spanish public TV dedicated her a TV series, a TV show. The life and work of this fascinating woman was then shown to the wider public, which incited a curiosity that would lead to a great dissemination of her works and a better understanding of women's life and conditions when writing in the Golden Age. I really believe in the power of these popular culture instruments like TV, etc., to disseminate works like this that are not so well known. And how about Sor Juana? Juana Inés de Asbaje, better known as Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. She is amazing, incredible. She was a gifted child who already during her adolescent years was able to amaze everyone with her wisdom and knowledge in many subjects. After not being allowed to go to school dressed up as a man, as she tried to do, she continued her education by teaching herself. After rejecting a few marriage proposals at the court in New Spain, she entered a convent in 1667 in search of time and tranquility to dedicate herself to study, which would have been impossible as a married woman. Once in the convent, she created one of the largest private libraries in the American continent at the time. Furthermore, she owned an impressive collection of musical and scientific instruments. Being always criticized by her boldness to write about topics which were not considered appropriate for her as a nun and as a woman, her books were attacked by figures such as the Bishop of Puebla in Mexico. In order to defend her work and the right of women to be educated, Sor Juana wrote her answer to Sor Filotea, one of the most important assertions in history in favor of women's access to knowledge. Here she claims the need to finding cultured women who would teach other women. Therefore, she defended the need of a female community which could produce and spread knowledge while looking for models in the past and in the present. From this work, so revealing of Sor Juana's thought, I took the expression that gives title to the exhibition, tan sabia como valerosa, wise and valiant. Another one of her works, a very important one, is the Carta Atenagórica, which means the serving of the wisdom of Athena. And this work illustrates her ability for philosophical and theological analysis, and also shows her wit and her rhetorical skills. It was really subversive that a woman would write about theology and philosophy during these times. I mean, one thing was writing novels or plays or poems, but writing about these topics was really, really subversive. And Sor Juana was more than ready to do it, and she did it. It is not surprising that she has awakened great interest among critics, because besides being one of the main representative authors of the Hispanic Baroque, she is the voice of an early but already determined, what we call today feminism. Additionally, she had to face a world that was not ready for her intelligence and eagerness to learn and express herself freely. The famous poem Foolish Men, that maybe you know, openly expresses her frustration of someone who perceives the inequality between men and women and offers a brilliant critique to that situation. There isn't any other text which defends women's dignity in a stronger and more determined way in any other work of that time. Well, we have talked about convents. Let's get out of the convents for a second. Outside the convents, many women tried also to take part in poetry competitions and contests. This is a very, very common way to try and find some space for the creation, for the writings. We find also inserted in collections and anthologies a few female names between the lists of male names which dominated the poetic scene of the time. And some names like Ángela de Sotomayor, Cristobalina Fernández, Mariana de Vargas, Silvia Monteser, Antonia de Nevares, etc., or this lady that we have here, only identified as Arminda. And these are some examples of female presence in this collection. So just a poem, and in this case, not even with a real name, which tells us that maybe it wasn't so appropriate to reveal your name in this type of context. So that's something that makes us think a little bit about what it meant writing and publishing during this time for a woman. These poems hold a secondary place in the anthologies where they are included, but they illustrate something that to me is very important. It's the will of their authors to take part in the cultural life of the time. And also they testify the formation of a conscience of female authorship, even if unstable and not too widespread yet. Evidently, there was a creative curiosity in many women, which led them to break rules and start writing, an activity that was subversive again when carried out by a woman in many occasions. Some of these women outside of the convents, not nuns, but like other women, like, you know, aristocrats, etc. I mean, any woman which is not in the convent. Some succeeded, such as María de Zayas and Ana Caro, two very important names, who became famous in the novel and the theater genres respectively. So María de Zayas is the most famous writer of the 16th and 17th centuries after Teresa de Jesus, Teresa, as in Teresa that I just talked about. Already in the 19th century, another woman, another Spanish writer, Emilia Pardo Bazán, insisted on recovering Zayas to include her in her women's library collection, a collection with works by women that Emilia Pardo Bazán in the 19th century started publishing in Spain. Since then, slowly but unstoppably, Zayas has attracted the interest of many researchers, especially female researchers, who have published and analyzed her text, both in Spain and in other countries, especially here in the United States, starting in the 1990s. I have to say that it was when I came to this country, to the States, to get my master's degree and then my PhD, when I really learned about these women, which is, you know, paradoxical after studying so much literature and history in Spain until I came here in my early 20s. So especially here is where this, the renaissance of this woman has started. However, we still know too little about the life of this unique woman who was in contact with the most famous authors of her time and was admired by many of them. Her most remarkable works are two collections of 4 short stories, and she also wrote a play and many poems. She was very active in the intellectual sphere of Madrid and took part in contests and literary academies. Authors such as Lope de Vega, which is the great playwright of Spain during the Golden Age, knew her and admired her. Zaya's texts are fascinating. And I can attest to the fact that students here at the University of Iowa, when I include her in my courses, they just love reading about her and discussing the wonderful and sometimes terrible things that happen in these writings. Her texts are determined defenses of women's freedom to write, to love, and to live in the way they choose. They especially criticize the double standards of the honor code and the violence against women, what today would talk about as gender violence. These texts face very hard issues that force the reader to position themselves in front of rape, honor murders, physical and psychological abuse, or forced confinement. Moreover, she even cautiously explores love and sexual relationships between women, very cautiously. At every moment, the author carries out a direct defense of women's rights and blames the society, which imposes absurd norms and sexist punishments for the misfortunes of many of these women. Women are trapped, for María de Zayas, in a system that does not provide them with any other option to survive than a marriage, which usually is a failed marriage. Moreover, Zayas constantly defends women's right to access education and participate in the cultural world. She's, of course, a firm defender of women's intellectual capacity. Zayas places us before a reality where women are abused, mistreated, and even murdered by their fathers or husbands. And the similarities with tragedies closer to us in time are obvious. Violence against women holds a key role in María de Zayas' text, where scenes with physical, sexual, or psychological abuse are constantly represented in the life of her characters. She emphasizes the violence by placing the female body in the center of the narration, eliminating the possibility of ignoring those bodies and the abuses suffered by the characters, who are individualized mainly through torture and violation and abuse. The impact on the reader is undeniable. In the face of this reality, Zayas proposes taking control of language, of women's stories, breaking the silence and transforming pain in a weapon that arises through the act of textual creation. Simultaneously, she reclaims a space both for women who write, like her, and also for female creativity in general, which was otherwise isolated in the margins of cultural life and condemned to irrelevance and disappearance, like the female bodies in her stories. The power of fiction in María de Zayas stems from her capacity of opening the physical and symbolic spaces to female subjectivity, rewriting it in a new discourse. María de Zayas admired another great female author of her time, the playwright Ana Caro. And I'm showing you here one of the manuscripts with one of her most important pieces, a wonderful play that was at the exhibition, and on the right a picture of the critical edition that I prepared of her work last year, also of this same book. Ana Caro is the most famous Spanish female playwright of the Golden Age. Her texts reclaim the characterization of female characters and propose behavioral models which are far removed from the passivity of the ideal lady at the time. The highest achievement of her works is precisely opening new spaces of female positioning in issues as complex as love, honor, marriage, friendship between women, which Caro accomplishes by questioning traditional values and subverting the expectations of the audience. In her work, she reclaims the female capacity to write. This is like constant, right? They all want to demand the right to actually write and to participate in culture. And Caro appeals to the long tradition of female writers as a way of authorizing female creative activity. She's also a master of irony and humor, and she reproduces through the graciosos, the jesters, or the fools in her plays. She puts in their mouth vindications, cheeky comments with sexual connotations sometimes, and any other issue which would have resulted as scandalous coming from a female author. And in this way, she manages to introduce in her text extremely subversive elements. After centuries of almost complete silence, Ana Caro's comedies have been represented again very recently in remarkable spaces, such as the International Festival of Classical Theatre in Almagro, Spain. And in this festival, her plays have captivated the audience because of their literary mastery and the relevance of their messages, relevance even for our current times. There's something very interesting about Ana Caro. It has always been said that Afra Ben was like the first female playwright who received money in exchange of her works. Well, when Afra Ben was a little girl, almost a baby, Ana Caro in Spain was already writing as a way of living, as a source of income. And there is a document from the authorities in Madrid, which is shown in the exhibition, that certifies this, that she was receiving money for her work. For her, writing is not a secondary activity, but a profession. It's obvious that she also had access to the literary circles of her time and gained a lot of fame. However, following the normal tendency in Spanish literary history and sometimes in general in literary history, which has silenced the women of these centuries, we barely have any information about her life. She's barely known outside specialist circles. Just the specialists on Golden Age, Spanish literature, and a few others know about this, about her work. It was always thought that she had born in Sevilla, but recent research places her birth in Granada. She has also been considered the possibility of her being a descendant of Muslims, as you know, were in Spain for centuries, although more studies needed to confirm this aspect. This would be, if we could prove this would offer a completely different angle on some of the issues we study in her works. Ana Caro is a breath of fresh air in the characterization of the female characters of Baroque theater. Her protagonists are women who abandon the passive role that has been assigned to them, and they face the world, fighting for their destiny and dressing up as men to travel, follow their dreams, or personally take revenge for the affronts committed against them. Nonetheless, overcoming the topic of the woman dressed up as men, so common in the Baroque theater, the heroines of Ana Caro's comedies not only adopt men's attires, but they also act according to the models associated with men, which become revolutionary when being represented by women. In this play that you have in front of you, Valor, Agravio y Mujer, or Courage, Betrayal, and a Woman Scorned, that will be a translation of the title, she subverts the myth of Don Juan, making a parody of the archetype. The protagonist, Leonor, alternating male and female attires, ridicules Don Juan by taking revenge on him and managing by herself to repair her own honor. Through a constant game based on the breakdown of gender expectations, which questions traditional roles, Ana Caro illustrates the possibility of new models of behavior, which could be valid for men and for women. Let me see how we're doing with time. Okay, I have to go a little faster. I'm sorry. We cannot end this journey without mentioning Catalina de Arauzo. Through text loaded with ambiguity, adventures, and deep emotions, Catalina de Arauzo introduces us to the complexities of gender identity. If there is a personality that represents the fluidity of identity in the empire of the Spanish monarchy, that would be, without any doubt, Catalina de Arauzo. Many centuries after her death, she continues to fascinate readers and critics. Catalina became a soldier of the Spanish army. She was a woman, she was born a woman, but she became a soldier of the Spanish army pretending to be a man and confessed having had rough relationships with women. Nowadays, maybe we would identify her as transgender or non-binary, but she doesn't fit in the conventional norms which categorically divide male and female genders and offers a complex identity model that makes both live together in a fluid and non-binary way. At her time, she was a real example of a woman dressed up as a man who, after being brought up in a convent in San Sebastian, managed to escape, travel all around Spain, and went to America, always with a male identity. In America, her secret is almost discovered when she's forced to marry a lady and has to flee suddenly. In another occasion, she loses her job when being discovered in an erotic encounter with another woman, although her identity was not revealed. And after experiencing many adventures, she's arrested finally in Peru after being involved in a fight. In order to avoid her execution, she confesses that she's a woman and a virgin, which saved her life. She then returns to Spain, requests the payment of her services as a soldier in America, and her fame became such that she ended up meeting the Pope, Urban VIII. She wrote an biography, which introduces us to the life of this peculiar author, commonly known as the soldier nun. That's how she's known. She was unique in her time, and she has inspired endless literary works, films, and paintings. In the exhibition, we included various documents which confirm the fantastic adventures. Sometimes they seem fantastic that she narrates in her autobiography, such as the petition of a license to travel to America and a relation of marriage, which shows the complexity of Catalina's public and private identity. And here there is one document where she asks for the possibility to dress as a man. Now that everybody knew she was a woman, she wanted to keep dressing as a man, and it was approved. So these are the documents we found in the archive of the INÉS in Seville. Well, there are many other women that I could talk about. Let me just mention this one, Oliva Sabuco. She deserves special attention. She's the author of a new philosophy of the nature of humankind. It's a complex philosophical treatise which was attributed to her father, since he claimed the authorship in a letter with the support of Olivia's husband and brother. After centuries of silence, and as a result of a lot of research, today we can confirm that the work was indeed written by her, by Oliva Sabuco, whose interest in philosophical topics that were considered hardly feminine at her time caused her many problems with Inquisition. In fact, her books ended up being burned, except this one, because it was attributed to her father. So this is the one we keep because it wasn't burned, because it wasn't written supposedly by her. She died in 1622 in a convent where she possibly managed to find her own space to think and create. In the exhibition, we also included not only writers. I wanted to give some information about women who participated in the cultural scene in different roles, like, for example, printers, publishers. Many of them present themselves as widow of. They usually took over the business when their husband died, but not all of them have show up as widow of somebody else. But, like, for example, in this in these examples here, I wanted to rescue her names, and I think they are very important because they had a key role in the dissemination of knowledge at the time and in developing the world of the book and therefore the cultural world. So I wanted to include them. Just a quick note on how these women have been recovered since the beginning of the 20th century and also 21st century. Manuel Serrano y Sanz started the path for the recognition of these female writers with his book on women writers that you can see on your left. Emilia Pardo Bazán, I already mentioned her, included María de Zayas in her collection of a library of women. Then the Franco era came, and that was not a good time to talk about women's intellectual history or literary production. But when Franco died and democracy arrived in Spain, finally, many researchers, especially female researchers, I already said that, started to devote more attention to these women. And sometimes the recognition, as I mentioned, took place first outside of Spain, mainly in the United States. And some work have been translated to languages like English, of course. This is an evidence of the huge interest that these writers attract in the United States, especially with the development of programs at universities of gender, women, and sexuality studies in the last decades, like the wonderful program we have on gender, women, and sexuality studies here at the University of Iowa. In Spain and Latin America, many of these works still lack editions of appropriate quality, which could be accessed by the wider public. That's one of the problems. And the texts, if they were published differently, they could reach their main target, the general readers, and become part of the readings available for the young and the older, men and women, specialists, non-specialists, who would enjoy and learn with them. There have been movies about them, and I'm not going to say much about that because I don't want to take too much time, but there have been movies. There have been some of them during the Franco times, like about Saint Teresa. They have celebrated especially values that work well with Franco and his political and religious ideas. But later in the democracy, things started to change a little bit, and we could see some movies which offer different perspectives on these women. One very controversial movie is this one from 2007, which portrays Santa Teresa, Saint Teresa, in a very radical way, was highly criticized by religious authorities due to the erotic representation of Teresa's visions. There are also other works that feature Sor Juana's life, Sor Juana's experiences, and recently many of these plays that these women wrote having also shown in different theaters around Spain with a lot of success. Actually, there is a lot to do, but female writings of the 16th and 17th centuries are gradually recovering their deserved place in our cultural and literary history and in our current world. These texts are treasures of our culture, and their authors offer fascinating creative and life models. Reading them, researching them, editing their works, as well as talking about them in conferences, in classrooms, and conversations is a task for all of us. By doing so, we will contribute to a better understanding of our history, our world, and ourselves. We find ourselves before a field of research in full growth. This is what I always tell my students, especially my PhD students, because you can engage in this with the huge satisfaction of rescuing from obscurity figures who undoubtedly deserve recognition that has been denied to them for centuries. Meanwhile, we have to circulate the texts, life experiences, and situations that help us to understand their place in history, literature, and life. This is not an exhibition. That's why this exhibition that I just told you about, this exhibition was not designed for specialists. My main goal has always been to attract visitors from different generations with diverse interests who can access them, who can learn interesting information that helps them to rethink the past, the present, and their connections. And I'm very happy. One of the main satisfactions of this exhibition is that in some high schools in Madrid are using the online exhibition as part of the curriculum, which was exactly what I had in mind when I started with this. So that makes me very, very happy. Well, please allow me to finish the presentation expressing a big thank you to the women who write, who wrote, who fought and keep fighting, opening with difficulty paths for those who come after them. How many times they have inspired me and have given me strength during hard times when life insisted on showing me its worst face. To them, I especially dedicate all this work because they have taught me to fight relentlessly in order to try and be wise and valiant. So that's all today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor. Now we're going to move on to our question and answer portion of the presentation. And if anybody wants to submit a question, please do so on the chat feature. And the chat button should be near your video or audio buttons on your on your screen. While we wait for the questions to come in, I would like to remind people that there are a few other programs still left this semester. You will be receiving notice through email if you usually do, or you can look at our website at www.icfrc.org to find out the upcoming programs. And finally, we are grateful to be able to make our online programs free and open to the public, but we do rely on the support of our members and attendees in order to operate. So we would deeply appreciate any free will offerings that people would like to give us at this point, and you can find the link on our chat feature of how to donate. With that, we're going to now transition into our question and answer period, and I would invite people, if you want to turn on your video screens, although please stay mute so that we can see faces as we are answering our questions. That would be great. So appears our first question is, how can one access the exhibition?
It's very easy. You just go to Google and you Google Cervantes Institute. Well, the Spanish title works better, even though the exhibition is in Spanish and English. There is a version in Spanish and a version in English. I guess that's why the Smithsonian could access the exhibition. But so yeah, Cervantes Institute, Rightwise and Valiant, the title, and you will see the link, and it's very easy to access. Just make sure you pick the language on the top of the page. You pick the language where you want to read information. There you will be able to see all the different works. Today I gave you like some samples. I didn't want to overwhelm you with a lot of pictures of old books, but I think that it was important to include many of these old books to see the reality of what was produced by these women. So yeah, it's very easy, and you can contact me. You can find me. You can contact me if you can find it. My email is public. I am in the Spanish and Portuguese department at the University of Iowa. So just go ahead, shoot me an email, and I will give you information. Or even if you want to talk about this a little bit more, I will be more than happy to keep talking about this. It's really a passion of mine. So I will be very, very happy to keep talking.
Great. Our next question is, what book do you recommend from Amelia Pardo Bazan?
Oh my God, that's so hard. Well, she's one of my favorite writers of all times. And she's also, I must say, she's from Galicia, a northwest region of Spain, where I am from also. I'm not, everybody thinks I'm from Madrid. For some reason, I'm not. I'm from Galicia, from the northwest of Spain. And I took a course on Amelia Pardo Bazán, a whole academic year in Santiago de Compostela. That's where I got my BA. So I got to read all her works, and I fell in love with her. She's really amazing. So what would I recommend? Well, of course, Los Pazos de Ulloa. Don't ask me to translate that right now, please. But Los Pazos de Ulloa would be a wonderful way to start. And then she has shorter stories that are fascinating. I usually include one of them in my classes here at Iowa. There is also a book that is called, what's the name? Oh goodness, I'm not going to remember, which is about a woman who falls in love with a younger guy. Insolación, something like, yeah, like heat. I don't know how to translate that right now, but there are several, there are many, all of them. I would recommend all of them. If you are familiar with Spanish, there are more opportunities. If you are not so familiar with Spanish, some of them, not all, are translated into English, but I would strongly recommend Amelia Pardo Bazán as a reading anytime. You learn a lot about many different things with her.
Great. This next question I wish came from me, but it didn't. But it starts off with, thank you for all your research and work to develop the exhibition. Is there a chance the exhibition will come to the Stanley Museum of Art?
Oof. That would be hard because of the materials that we include in the exhibition. Most of the materials come from the National Library of Spain, which is in Madrid, and the exhibition was also in Madrid. So there weren't a lot of logistical problems for transportation, because these two institutions are very close to each other. And the National Library was very, very concerned about how these books would be treated during the whole process. And they were so concerned that the Cervantes Institute had to basically build a that when I showed the picture of the exhibition, you could see that the books were put in a little place with glasses and covered. Well, that has to be built for the exhibition. At some point, we thought that the exhibition was not going to happen because the National Library said, if you don't keep the exact same temperature and light conditions on the books during those 3 months, we're not loaning them to you. So that has to be built. With the help of private companies that offer their money to promote the culture. I mean, that was incredible. I can imagine the National Library letting these books come here to play. So that would be a huge problem. It would be wonderful. It would be wonderful, of course. I would love that. But if they had problems with bringing them almost across the street, the National Library were the pickiest ones, because in the archive of the Indies or of the City Archive of Madrid, we also loaned some materials like these ones about Catalina de Arauso. They were more flexible, but I understand these are treasures of the Spanish culture, so you cannot risk losing them, or you cannot risk them suffering. They have lasted since the 16th, 17th century. We want them to last, at least 400 more years or even longer. So I completely understand. But there is the online exhibition, so you can go ahead and dig in, and hopefully you will like it.
Great. I wish we had more time to talk. Unfortunately, we are running out of time here. So I'm going to have to conclude our program, but I want to give a very big thank you to Professor Ana Rodríguez-Rodríguez for the wonderful presentation and for sharing her expertise with us today. It was absolutely fascinating, and I really appreciate your work and your presentation. And I am honored to virtually present you with the coveted Iowa City Foreign Relations Council coffee mug for coffee, tea, or any beverage of your choice, or for pens or pencils, whatever you prefer. And we will coordinate the delivery efforts with you very quickly. So thank you so much. I want to also thank our viewing audience. Thank you for joining us. I also will once again like to say thank you to our sponsors for their generous support, as well as our members and interns. And with that, we are adjourned. With my great thank you again to Professor Rodríguez-Rodríguez.
Thank you all. And please go ahead and contact me with questions, with comments, with anything. So I'm always happy to talk about women writers, Spanish culture, anything related to Spain or Latin America. So I'm here, I'm local. So just feel free to contact me. I will be more than happy to talk to you. Thank you so much for the invitation. It has been an honor, real honor for me. Thank you.
Thank you. An honor for us as well.